Hey Misfits, welcome back. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm Sean or Shaunacorn of Shaunacorn Mindship Coaching, a trauma recovery coach. I am certified health and life coach, therapeutic arts facilitator, trauma-informed care practitioner. And before I get into this, I want to be intentional about language. I refer to myself as Caucasian, not white. And I want to explain why. White is not an ethnicity. It's a color. And historically, it's a category that was created to establish hierarchy, superiority, and power. For most of my life, I refer to myself as white as well, because I didn't know any better. That language is deeply normalized. The more educated I became, the more I understood how much weight that word carries. White is not neutral. It was created to separate rank and dominate. I identify as Caucasian because that term is tied to ancestry, not supremacy. I'm not saying that to shame anyone or who still uses the word white for themselves. I'm saying it because language matters, and unlearning is part of this work. And when we're talking about history, trauma, and power, words are not small things. So why I'm speaking on Black History Month? Yes, I am a Caucasian woman. I look white. And I'm speaking about Black History Month because there is an enormous amount of trauma here, like historical trauma, systemic trauma, generational trauma, that is still alive right now. People of color carry trauma simply because of their existence in a world that has, from the beginning, placed violence, control, and dehumanization on them by white people and white systems. I am not speaking for the Black community. I am not claiming to be a part of it. I am not positioning myself as an authority over anyone's lived experience. I am speaking from my lane. I am a trauma recovery coach. And I also have 2 degrees in criminal justice, and an associate's and bachelor's, and an associate's and a bachelor's with an emphasis on management. That background gave me a deep understanding of how systems are built, enforced, and protected, and how trauma is not just personal, but structural. That is the lens I'm using here. So if we're talking about foundations and historical context, we have to go to the beginning of the system. Africans were stolen from their homes. They were taken from their land, their families, their cultures. They were brought here against their will and enslaved for one purpose, and that was to be property. Not workers, not citizens, not people. Property. White settlers built wealth and infrastructure and power on the backs of enslaved human beings. And it needs to be said plainly. Black people were not viewed as human. They were legally, socially, and culturally treated as objects, as something to be owned, controlled, punished, bred, and discarded. That is the foundation. When slavery was abolished, Black people weren't suddenly safe, equal, or respected. What happened is this: the law was forced to acknowledge their humanity, and that acknowledgement was met with violence and backlash from the white people and white power structures. Jim Crow laws, lynching, segregation, voter suppression, redlining, criminalization. From a criminal justice perspective, this is not accidental. Systems don't just appear. They are built in reaction to perceived threat. And Black autonomy, Black freedom, was treated as a threat. From a trauma-informed lens, this is critical to understand. Trauma doesn't only live in individual bodies. It lives in families, in communities, in policies, in institutions. What generations of people are hunted, punished, surveilled, denied safety, and denied dignity, their nervous systems adapt in order to survive. Anger makes sense. Grief makes sense. Hypervigilance makes sense. Exhaustion makes sense. Those are not character flaws. They are trauma responses. And expecting people to move on while these systems remain intact is another form of harm. White people were raised inside systems that taught superiority, sometimes loudly, sometimes quietly, sometimes through outright violence, and sometimes through silence and denial. That conditioning created ignorance, and ignorance caused harm. Intent does not erase impact. This is not about guilt. It is about responsibility. Because not knowing does not make harm disappear. And silence does not make systems stop functioning. White systems protect white power, whether they acknowledge or not. This is not ancient history. The same foundations show up today in policing, incarceration, healthcare, education, housing. Who is believed? Who is protected? Who is punished? You cannot separate the present from the past when the systems were never dismantled, only updated. Black History Month is not about comfort. It's about truth. It's about foundations. It's about naming harm accurately. It's about recognizing trauma without blaming the people who carry it. People of color are not too sensitive. They are responding to centuries of violence. And white people are not being harmed by asking to look honestly at history. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know everything. You do have to be willing to see what was built, who it harmed, and how it still operates. That's where real change begins. Thank you for watching. Thank you.